far back as I can remember, I have felt a deep sense of being alone and that I was somehow bad in my core. I have this old familiar feeling of being unworthy or unlovable. And when I sat down with myself and I reflected on where my earliest memories of feeling like this were, it would have been when I was 2 years old. Now, I had previously thought that experiences I had a little bit later on in my childhood would have been the original source of those feelings and beliefs about myself. But I discovered that, in fact, it was quite simply my first day at kindergarten. I was a lot younger than most, and although my mom had prepared me leading up to that day, my 2-year-old brain was not able to fully process that information. I recall looking around, seeing strangers everywhere. Some little kids like myself, and others adults I didn't know or recognize. I felt completely alone, lost, afraid, and invisible. And I can still see clearly my mini self standing in my school uniform with my back against the wall, looking around. I didn't know where to go, what to do, who to talk to, and most terrifying of all, whether my parents were coming back for me. In that moment, a seed was planted in my mind that I must have been bad or done something wrong for my parents to have brought me here and to leave me behind. And although I have a loving family and I grew up to have other amazing childhood experiences, that moment and a few other experiences that happened a little bit later on in my childhood began to solidify this narrative that I was somehow bad, flawed, or imperfect and unlovable. At the core of this narrative were two fears: a fear of being abandoned and a fear of never being loved for who I was. As human beings, we all have the same universal needs that allow us not only to survive, but to thrive. Those needs would include physical, emotional, and psychological security. Physical needs would be things like food, shelter, and a safe environment. And one of the fundamental aspects of emotional and psychological security is attachment. And we begin to develop those attachments as early as birth with our primary caregivers. And one of the things that connects us all as human beings is a deep need for connection and emotional intimacy. Now, as children, we begin to develop our identities in the reflection of ourselves in the eyes of the people who raise us: parents, grandparents, caregivers, other important adults in our lives. This process then begins to also include siblings if we have them, peers, cousins, and so on. And if we experience certain events in our childhood that interrupt the natural development of our identity, it may also begin to disrupt that trust that we have with ourselves and with the world around us, and it creates a feeling of disconnectedness, which of course interrupts that sense of security. And as we continue to develop as young children, excuse me, those experiences or painful moments in our childhood may also start to lead us to have certain beliefs or feelings about ourselves that interrupts our self-concept or our self-esteem. It may also begin to lead to a series of feelings and reactions and behaviors that keep reinforcing that initial experience that might have been painful or overwhelming. And for most of us, that triggered pattern of behaving and feeling and thinking of a certain way begins to keep us stuck at that stage where a painful event or an experience may have occurred. And that is how the inner child begins to take form. So, what is the inner child? The inner child is that part of ourselves that still resides within us and behaves or reacts as though we are still stuck at an emotional stage or an age where a painful event has occurred. It's the part of us that is behaving and feels emotionally and psychologically as though we are still at that age. And the reason we may feel stuck is we may not have had the right tools, the space, or the proper support to be able to cope or make sense or process that experience. Now, what does it mean to process our emotions or process the experience? Imagine for a moment that you're observing a baby or a young child. When the baby feels joy, or hungry, or hurt, or fussy, you can see that emotional state being fully expressed in their entire being, head to toe, inside out. Now, in contrast, if we've heard messages growing up such as, stop crying, don't laugh so loudly, settle down, it's not such a big deal, or one of my favorites, big girls or big boys don't cry. Well, we begin to block or stop ourselves from feeling. This also begins to interrupt us from being able to identify our feelings when they do surface. And ultimately, it also begins to disconnect us or interrupt our ability to more authentically connect with others and to feel more close to the people in our lives. So how do we get unstuck? What do we need to engage in order to begin to release some of those old memories, feelings, beliefs, and thoughts about ourselves? Well, one way is to start to think about a painful experience or an event that we may have gone through that is perhaps replaying in our lives presently. We might want to think about a recurring painful pattern of behaving that might feel automatic or instinctive, or something that initiates a visceral response in your body that feels like it's outside of your control. So let's take a few moments now. I invite you to close your eyes if you'd like to do so. Take a deep breath in through your nose to center yourself, exhaling. Can you identify a painful reaction that you experience over and over again? Do you notice this reaction in your relationships? Perhaps it's something people have pointed out that they notice about you. Gently open your eyes and write down whatever has come to mind for you. Does anyone need more time? Good to go? Okay. In my experience, any time I suspected that someone might be upset with me, or if I noticed any subtle shift in a person's mood or tone of voice or change in their behavior, I would automatically assume that I had done something wrong, or that this person no longer wanted to be in my life. The trigger for me had become any hint of being viewed as imperfect or unworthy. It would lead me into a spiral of feelings of abandonment, rejection, shame, and isolation. And this pattern that began to unfold would lead me to become people-pleasing, perfectionistic, to put everybody else's feelings and needs ahead of my own, to not allow myself to show my vulnerabilities or to express my needs in any way. I began to block my feelings from myself as well as from the people in my life. And at the core of all of this was a fear that if I were to allow myself to show my vulnerabilities or my imperfections, that somehow I would be rejected for it, and that people would see my flaws and my true badness. Ultimately, this pattern kept reinforcing that initial feeling at 2 years old of feeling alone with my back against the wall. I wasn't able to allow the good in, and I began to doubt the care or the love that I did receive in my life. In recognizing that what we seek externally may in fact be what we are trying to heal from internally, and that our repeating patterns of behavior and the reactions that we have are perhaps blocking us from having our needs met, then we can become more aware of our own actions and how they might in fact be making us feel worse. I know for me, I began to be defensive, to be mistrusting, to push people away. I was always doubtful that if someone wanted to be my friend or to try to get to know me, that if they were to really know how bad I was inside, that I would ultimately be caught and that they would not want to be there anymore. So I'd like to invite all of you now to close your eyes once again. Take a few deep breaths to center yourself. In the space that we're all holding, identify and acknowledge for yourselves a painful event or experience from your childhood where you might be stuck. How old were you? Who was present? What were you thinking at the time? What else do you recall from the event? I'll take a deep breath in again through the nose. Exhaling slowly out. Gently open your eyes, and we'll come back to the room. Write down what has come to mind for you and describe it in as much detail as you need to. Does anyone need more time? Now that hopefully you've each identified a painful experience or event from your childhood, we'll move into beginning to process some of the emotions that are connected to that experience. For many of us, our emotions might seem overwhelming or scary at times. But we need to give space to allow our emotions to be completely felt, to process them in order to allow ourselves to heal and to move past our stuck points. Emotions are energy that works, that moves through us and needs to be transformed and released. When we block or dismiss or avoid or distract from our emotions, we're not allowing the natural process of the feelings to be transformed, to be able to let go. That's what we find remains stuck in our bodies as tension or in our behaviors. We need to give space to allow the needs, the hurts, the impact that a particular experience or event may have had on our identities, on our relationships, and on our lives. It is a natural part of the human experience to have a full range of emotions, the painful ones as well as the more joyful or positive ones. And if we begin to block the painful emotions, what we ultimately will do is also block the more positive or joyful ones. I know from my own experience, the more I try to dismiss, stuff down, numb, or distract from my feelings of sadness or shame or loneliness at different moments of my life, the more I also started to feel disengaged, depressed, and unable to feel joy. It would lead me to further feelings of isolation and being completely disconnected from my life. Emotions give us important information about an experience to be able to make sense of it and move through it, rather than to remain stuck in re-experiencing an event over and over. So that's what we'll do now. I'll ask you to close your eyes again. Gently place your left hand on your hearts, your right hand on your belly. Take a deep, slow inhale through your nose, feeling your chest and your bellies expanding. Exhaling slowly through your nose, feeling your chest and belly contracting. Again, inhaling through your nose, chest and belly expands. Exhale slowly through your nose, chest and belly contracting. Proceed at your natural breathing rhythm. Feel free to keep your hands where they are or gently place them on your laps. I invite you to connect in your minds, once you're centered in yourselves, with your inner child at the moment that that painful event or experience that you've just identified. How did your inner child feel at that moment? How did your inner child feel immediately after the experience ended? What did your inner child need at that time? What response or reaction did your inner child receive, if any? How has that impacted you as an adult? Now, with your eyes remaining closed, come back to the present moment and connect with your adult self. What emotions do you still feel today when you reflect back on that painful experience? What beliefs, thoughts, or values about yourself have you interpreted from that experience? Take a deep breath in again through the nose. Exhaling slowly. Gently open your eyes and come back to the room. If there are any lingering feelings or reflections you'd like to take note of, please do so now. As we begin to sit with and process some of the feelings that are still very present and connected to those earlier experiences, we might begin to recognize that we all have an inner child that still resides within us. Our inner child is vulnerable and is perhaps still hurting or sad or angry or scared at moments when our triggers are present. As children, at the moment when a painful experience has occurred, it makes sense, it's understandable that we were not able to cope with that at the time. We may not have been able to advocate for our needs or to protect ourselves. But as adults, it is our role to begin to parent ourselves. We need to give space to be able to fully process the emotions in order to be able to move forward and to be able to do this. It is our responsibility as adults to be able to advocate for ourselves, take care of our needs. I'm blinking. Excuse me. I got it. We need to perhaps grieve the person we could have been had we not gone through those experiences. We may need to let go of the wish to have had somebody else advocate or meet our needs on our behalf. We may need to recognize the meaning that we've attached to certain experiences and to find a way to accept that we can't undo what has already happened. And if we do not find acceptance, then we'll forever find ourselves re-experiencing an event over and over again. For example, if I have felt voiceless as a child, as an adult, it becomes my responsibility to express my needs, my desires, my thoughts, rather than to sit quietly and hope that someone else will do that for me. If I now have a moment where I feel angry or afraid or anxious, it is my responsibility to either challenge that or regulate it. It is up to me to advocate for myself as an adult who is capable and not as a helpless or vulnerable child. So I'd like to now engage our adult selves in a healing conversation with the inner child within all of us. So we'll close our eyes once again. Take a deep breath in through the nose, exhaling gently. Inhale again through the nose. Exhale slowly. Continue breathing at your natural rhythm. I want you to imagine your child's self at the age when that painful experience occurred, sitting with your present adult self. Imagine that you are both sitting somewhere that feels safe and calm. For me, that place is always on the beach. Maybe for you, it's in a lush forest or your childhood home. Wherever that space might be for you, picture it clearly. What colors do you see? Do you notice any sounds? What do you observe from that space you're both sitting in? Once you have that space clearly in your mind, imagine that you are turning towards your inner child and saying, "Thank you for doing the best that you could have done. You have worked so hard all of these years to keep us healthy, strong, and safe. You were so young, and yet you've gotten us this far. I am so grateful for you." I want you to know that you're safe now. You are cared for. You are worthy. You are both loved and lovable. You are not being judged. You will not be abandoned or rejected by me. I am and will be here for you. I want you to know that I will now be taking over, making decisions for us. You can be free to play, to be creative, to be at peace. You are free to be a child. I will be here to manage our emotions, to take care of our needs, to remain healthy, and to stay connected to the world around us. Now, with your eyes remaining closed, imagine that you are turning towards your inner child, picking them up and embracing them, whispering whatever else your inner child needs to hear. When you're ready, let your inner child go and play. Once you've done that, keeping your eyes closed, I invite you to say the following to your present adult self. Today, here and now, I am safe. I am worthy. I am capable. I am resilient. I can take care of myself and my needs. I am whole. We'll take a deep breath in through the nose, exhaling with a loud sigh. Let it out. Inhaling again through the nose, exhaling with a louder sigh. When you're ready, gently open your eyes. Come back to the room. Some of you might be wondering, now what? Where do we go from here? I think that a necessary but challenging next step for us to heal and move past our experiences or our stuck points is to challenge and reframe this narrative, to shift perspectives. One way that we can do this is by recognizing when we're caught in a repeating pattern, orienting ourselves to the present rather than what occurred in the past, and then responding to the present moment rather than an old or past emotional reaction. This is an ongoing process, and at times when we're sick, vulnerable, tired, or stressed, the old patterns might reemerge. That's okay. It just means that our inner child might need a bit of care. And by recognizing and acknowledging the needs in that moment, we're able to then shift perspectives and have an opportunity to respond differently. I know from my own experience, anytime I am re-triggered, it becomes much more easy and less overwhelming or challenging in the moment to reframe or to challenge that old narrative. And each time we do that, the old patterns become weaker and a new narrative can emerge. For example, if I now have a moment where I'm feeling small or insecure or anxious or agitated, I'm much more quickly able to check in with myself by asking the following questions. The first question is, what am I feeling right now? Next question. Then I'll ask, what is this experience reminding me of? What do I need in this moment?
Perhaps your inner child needs a little bit of self-soothing. And we can do that by recognizing what we need, what we're feeling in that moment, and then revisiting this conversation that I've just guided us through. Checking in with the inner child, saying, you're held, you're safe, you're okay, I've got you. Then I'll check, what meaning am I attaching to this experience? And am I responding from a past pattern, or am I reacting to what's happening in the moment? And finally, how do I respond differently to this present circumstance? Well, it's by responding as an adult who is grounded and capable, and not as a vulnerable or hurt child. I know these questions sound a little bit similar to where we began our exploration, and that's because it is a repetitive process. And some of us may have several experiences that may need to be processed for us to move past them. That's okay too. Healing is ongoing, but healing is possible. We are not our stories. We are not our past experiences. We are not broken, and we do not need to be fixed. We all have within us the capacity to heal and to find harmony within ourselves and with the people around us. Thank you very much.